So this is gonna be an interesting thing for me to dive into. I'm gonna tackle a character that for the vast majority of the story was completely absent and presumed to be dead despite having such an integral role in the story. However, this ain't gonna be a walk in the park. I know I said Yakuza 4 had the most convoluted plot, but Yakuza 5 is a close second. In fact, it might even be even more confusing. The rabbit hole gets too deep that for the sake of constructing a straight timeline, I'm gonna have to start from the very beginning. And by beginning, I mean sometime between the 80s and the 90s, which means that it had to have been after the events of Yakuza 0. Now, why am I being so broad with the time period? Well, you'll soon understand why. You see, there's this photo that Akiyama had in possession that shows Majima, Park, and Katsuya taking a group shot. Now, the photo itself is confirmed to have taken place 20 years ago, which would translate to 1992. Although the person that gave Akiyama the photo said that Katsuya and Park knew each other for more than 20 years, at least according to the English translation, meaning that Majima likely knew them before 1992, since we do know that he was acquainted with both of them. But if that's the case, is there any rough estimate as to when they could have met? Well, the only thing we can confirm is that when Majima and Park were partners, both Katsuya and Park were supposedly working in the entertainment business in Tokyo, and assuming that's where they lived, then they had to have met sometime between 1989 and 92. Because Majima was then working for the Shimano family once again, and his hairstyle seemed to match with the picture he took with both of them, since before then he had longer hair. Although one thing that's weird about this photo is that it seems to have been taking place in Sotembori based on the location, so I have no idea if they were just visiting the place or if it takes place after both of them had moved there, which I don't find it to be very likely because I'm pretty sure by the time Park moved to Osaka, she had already broken up with Majima, and she insinuated that she hadn't seen him since then. So I'd have to assume that they were just visiting the place, which is kind of funny to think about it given how much of a traumatic experience it was for Majima to live there during the events of Yakuza 0, and also the fact that in Kiwami 2 he didn't seem to be very excited about revisiting the place. But anyway, on the subject of Majima's appearance, I noticed that he's wearing his snake themed eye patch, which is kinda weird because he didn't always have that. Even in Yakuza 1 and 2, he didn't have the eye patch, it was just a generic black one. Now, normally I would say that maybe Yakuza 5 retconned the eye patch, but even in Yakuza 0 and the Kiwami remakes, Majima is still wearing the generic eye patch, so I have to wonder what exactly made him drop the snake theme one for the blank one, only to then later revert back in Yakuza 3. Now, as fascinating as it would be to speculate on why, I'm not gonna dwell on this too much. I'm just gonna go ahead and say this is probably just a plot hole. But moving on, Majima at one point married Park, even if it was in secret, but their relationship didn't last very long. Meanwhile, Majima still remained pretty close with Katsuya, even helping him after he had an injury that ended his action movie career. From the looks of it, it also seemed like he might have been the person that got Katsuya into the Yakuza scene when he kickstarted his idol agency. This took place in Osaka because they believe it would be easier to start a business there than in Tokyo. With all of this established, I think we can move on to the 2010s. Now, at the beginning of the game, the Tojo clan was going through a process of establishing alliances with other families. Daigo went to Fukuoka to negotiate with the Yamagasa family, while Majima was assigned to talk to the Kitakata family in Hokkaido. Also, just to get this out of the way, without spoiling Lost Judgment, no, I have no idea if this family has anything to do with you-know-who, I'm just gonna assume that they're unrelated. Anywho, at the start, Daigo explained that the reason this was happening was because the Tojo clan and the Omi Alliance for a while had a relatively amicable relationship, one that was about to be put at risk because the leader of the Omi Alliance was diagnosed with a fatal disease, and the candidates for the new leadership all expressed distaste towards the Tojo clan. So as a safety precaution, they decided to establish partnerships with other Yakuza families in order to increase their power, enough that they wouldn't potentially be put in danger by the new leadership of the rival organization. Now, we do learn later on that Daigo had already started suspecting that Kurosawa, the chairman of the Omi Alliance, might have had something planned ahead ever since he declared that he was sick, but he still went with his quest for mergers and acquisitions regardless. Now, although the title of this video is explaining Majima's involvement, I'm gonna have to dedicate some time to explaining Daigo as well because the two of them are interconnected. Now, Daigo's talk with the patriarch of the Yamagasa family went pretty well. They were pretty much ready to establish an alliance. However, the same day they talked, Daigo suddenly vanished from Fukuoka. We learned later on that he actually went to Nagoya. This was because the meeting that they had initially set up was actually meant to take place in a hotel, only to then later be rearranged to a private car drive. The reason why this happened was because Daigo noticed some oddities in the meeting location. You see, normally these kinds of meetings tend to take place in outskirt locations that are less accessible for outsiders to view, but the place they chose was in the middle of the town in a building with large windows. This made Daigo suspect that an assassination attempt would have likely occurred, and since the people who were primarily responsible for setting up the meeting were Tojo men, Daigo instantly realized that there was a rat in the clan. This prompted him to disappear from the city without anyone knowing. Now, to get back to Majima, as I said earlier, he was assigned to reach a deal with the Kitakata family for equal alliance, and things were working out pretty well in Hokkaido as well. However, something odd happened during their second meeting. Majima told the patriarch of the Kitakata family to abandon their deal altogether. He apparently sensed that there was something fishy going on in the background and believed that the entire partnership would be them falling under someone's trap. Now, I have a pretty strong feeling that the disappearance of Daigo might have convinced him of this. I'm not entirely sure if he was aware of what was going on in Fukuoka, but assuming that he did, he must have realized that Daigo had vanished for a good reason. I will say this though, I can't say for certain if Daigo's disappearance really was the reason Majima dropped out of the deal. I say this because the only thing I can confirm is that by the time he was attacked, Daigo had already disappeared. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, at the end of Kiryu's arc in Fukuoka, he was hit with the news that the day before, the police had recovered a dead body which would then later be identified as Majima. The thing is, I made sure to check how many days passed since the first night, which was when Daigo disappeared. And I can say that at least more than 3 days passed, meaning that Majima was attacked a few days after Daigo went off the grid. So while it is possible that Majima might have learned about it and ultimately decided to call up the deal, in truth, that could have also happened before Daigo vanished because the game doesn't give specific dates on when everything happened aside from what month and year takes place. Plus, this is also assuming that Majima was even attacked roughly at the same time his body was identified, despite the fact that it could have easily taken place at an earlier date and it just simply took some time for the police to identify the body, which, by the way, that wasn't even his body anyway, which makes this even more complicated. Now, assuming that wasn't the case, is there anything else that could have sparked Majima's interest? Well, there is actually something else to consider. You see, after Daigo left Fukuoka, he decided to head to Nagoya because he wanted to investigate the murders of Azumi and Takashi. 2 deaths that eventually ended up confirming a suspicion he had that Kurosawa was somehow involved because the 2 of them were of separate ties, one from Tojo and the other one from Omi. Now, assuming Majima was aware of this as well, that could have prompted him to back out of the deal, especially because unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure Azumi was in Nagoya to establish an alliance with the Nagoya family. And so if things went south there, then it could be safe to assume that other deals were also compromised by some kind of trap. But this is assuming that Azumi and Takashi died before Daigo disappeared, which I'm honestly not even sure of that either. But there is one thing we can confirm: Daigo and Majima proceeded with the plan to form alliances with other families while knowing that Daigo had suspected that Kurosawa might have been up to something. So because of this, regardless of how Majima was made aware of something fishy going on in the shadows, he is certainly one of the first few people who would have realized that something was up. The only thing Majima couldn't do is concretely prove that Kurosawa or really anyone was behind it. That was, of course, until he suffered the attack that everyone assumed killed him. In all actuality, he survived, and it also gave him an opportunity to set up his own trap. Now, later on in the game, Akiyama was talking to Date and Saejima about the information he had gathered so far, and they pointed out how the incidents in Fukuoka, Nagoya, and Hokkaido proceeded very differently from what had happened in Osaka. This was because there was a feud going on between the Daine chair and the Osaka enterprises, in which for some reason Katsuya's men were after a key for a safe that had a letter presumably mailed by Majima. Now, because the letter seemed to have been sent after Majima news had been reported, they intended to retrieve the letter so that they could track Majima's whereabouts. Now, the thing is, Park was killed roughly after she had given the key to Haruka, and because we know Katsuya and Park knew each other, it wouldn't make much sense to say that Katsuya was responsible for her death, and Akiyama deduced that the letter was actually a trap meant to expose the traitors that were lurking behind Katsuya's men, which was later proven to be Sanai. Now, I also have to assume that Haruka receiving the key may not have been planned and was probably a last-minute decision by Park after she realized that her life may be on the line now that the information about the letter had been leaked. Now, there's another thing I want to touch on. So, it was believed that the next candidates for the chairman of the Omi Alliance were all people who showed opposition towards the Tojo clan. Now, while you could argue that it might have been the case for the other candidates, as far as Katsuya, it's a bit hard to believe that given how he seems to be good friends with Majima, a member of the Tojo clan. So my theory is that this wasn't actually true and it was actually Kurosawa misinterpreting Katsuya so that the Tojo clan could proceed in creating alliances with other families, which was part of his plan. Something else I want to point out is that Akiyama believed that Majima was actually dead by the time the letter was sent, which was of course not true. This was later debunked, so it's possible he might have actually sent the letter since it was speculated that Katsuya and Park orchestrated the whole letter delivery. Honestly, I don't think it makes much of a difference because at the end of the day, it would still be a trap that the three of them came up to lure out the traitor. Then of course, Kurosawa threatened to shoot bullets at Haruka during the concert and used that to blackmail Majima into working for him, and then everything else happening as it did. Now before I end this video, I kinda wanna talk about two things. Firstly, during one of the karaoke sections in Kiwami 2, we saw flashbacks of Makomo instead of Park, which would kind of imply that Majima never let go of her feelings for her even after marrying Park. Another thing I want to add is something I said in my last video. I talked about how Akiyama and Tanimura speculated that there was someone else working behind the scenes, and while it was later confirmed that it was indeed Munakata that was pulling the strings, something I always wondered is how much of what happened at the beginning of the story was actually part of his plan. Like with the whole scheme of firing a member of the Ueno Seiwa clan to pressure the Tojo clan into compensating for their actions, it's really hard to argue that this benefits Munakata in any way. But I've actually had some time to think about it, and I actually found a reason for why this might have actually benefited Munakata's cause. You see, his end goal was to cripple the Tojo clan enough that they would be asking for the police to aid them. Once Munakata met up with Daigo, one of the main things they agreed to do was taking down Katsuragi, who was at the time causing internal damage to the clan with the amount of assassinations that they were occurring and the money he had taken by that point. So in a way, it actually makes sense for Munakata to send all of these instructions. It would also explain why Arai was also involved in it and even commented after he killed Shibata that there were other higher parties involved. Although if this is true, then that would actually mean that Katsuragi was less responsible for the plan making than I initially thought. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say. Make sure to follow this channel if you want to keep up with more videos of the Yakuza games. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a nice day.